ambalo ni kuhusiana ama linafungamana na jinsi ya kupata haki wakati huu ambapo taifa linapambana na virusi vya COVID-19. Ni tukio ambalo litakujia moja kwa moja kuanzia sasa hadi mwendo wa saa 7:30 papa hapa KTN News. Mtazamaji, jinsi ya kupata haki wakati huu ambapo taifa linapambana na virusi vya COVID-19. Naitwa Cecilia Wakesho Mathuva. Shukran sana kwa muda wako. Kuwa na utazamaji mwema.
Kenya to find out what's in the menu in the coming weeks. But today our focus is on access to justice in the amidst COVID-19, and we have with us a panel of eminent jurists who are joining us today. We have Honorable Justice David Majanja, who is a judge of the High Court, a commissioner at the Judicial Service Commission, the vice chairperson of the Judiciary Committee on Elections, and a member of ICJ Kenya. Welcome, Judge. We also have Dr. Linda Musumba, the chair of the Kenya Institute for Public Policy Research and Analysis. She's an advocate of the High Court of Kenya and a teacher of law. Karibu sana daktari. We have Don Dare, who is the executive director of the Pan-African Lawyers Union. He's an advocate of the High Court of Kenya and a member of the ICJ Kenya. Welcome, Don. We have Beatrice Njeri, who is an advocate of the High Court of Kenya and the senior legal officer at the Center for Human Rights Education and Awareness crew. Welcome, Beatrice. All right, I am your moderator, Teresa Mutua, working at ICJ Kenya, the program manager to the Democratic Governance and Rule of Law program.
And I'm Silas Kamanza. I'm program officer. I work with Teresa at ICJ Kenya, and I'm really glad that you are able to join us today. Thank you. Karibuni.
Thank you. So remember to send in your questions through this platform and through our YouTube channel, which we are live on, and through our Twitter page, that is ICJ Kenya. Send your questions indicating question or comment indicating comment, and to the person that you want to ask your question to. And my colleague Silas will pick up those questions and pose them to the panelists as we go along. Now, let me begin with you, Dawn. A lot of the discussions we've had on access to justice during this COVID-19 have revolved around the professionals. So the judiciary has had quite a few discussions on what the judiciary can do and should do during COVID-19 to stay open, you know, and opening the courts to the public. We've had lawyers talk about how to keep law firms open and their businesses open, but very discussions have been had about what Wanjiko wants and what the needs of Wanjiko in terms of access to justice during COVID-19. So help us as we begin this discussion to, you know, just have an overall view of what are those needs of Wanjiko and why haven't we had that discussion so far. John.
Okay, thank you very much, Teresa, and also Silence and colleagues. I would say one thing at the outset. Well, the focus of the webinar is on Kenya. We're a number of panelists, so I suggest that I add value by trying to, where I can, bring in comparative national perspectives and also regional perspectives. And my co-panelists can speak with more details about the intricate details of our administration of justice system currently in Kenya. I do agree with you, though, that whereas, as far as we know, the National Council for the Administration of Justice in Kenya has met at least twice, possibly more times, issued at least 2 detailed communiques. A lot of the focus has been on the judiciary and how to make the judicial arm of government work. And we haven't yet seen more detailed thinking around the other members of the National Council for the Administration of Justice, public prosecutions, the police, prisons, probation services, witness protection services, and the other non-state members of the council, such as the law society and civil society. I'd also like to say in general, that at the continental level, both the African Court, African Commission on Human and People's Rights, and the African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child have released comprehensive statements on what are the obligations of states with regard to the rule of law and the protection and promotion of human and people's rights in the context of a health-induced emergency. So these statements already emphasize very clearly the legal obligation of states, even in terms of an emergency. And just in terms of the African international courts and tribunals that I frequent, the East African Court of Justice has already sent out its course list for the appellate division for the next month. And starting literally next week, Tuesday, 19th May, till Wednesday, 10th June, they will be holding virtual sessions, scheduling conferences, hearings, deliverings of rulings and judgments, and so on. And they have opted to use Microsoft Teams platform, which we already tested last week. Both divisions of the court, the Registry and Select Council. The African Court on Human and People's Rights has also formally notified the public that it will hold its 57th ordinary session virtually. That will run from 1st to 26th June. So if you were to ask what are some of the nuanced access to justice challenges that Wanjiku and her sisters and brothers across the continent are facing, I would pick three that I think are not being sufficiently highlighted in the public discourse. And one is the right to information. Citizens across Kenya, across Africa, and in other places of the world are demanding better information. Not just quantity of information, but also quality of information. They don't want to know just the statistics. They also want to know the details of the plans that the respective governments are taking, that the regional institutions are taking, or even considering. And even when we debate Wanjiku in this context, as you've correctly said, Teresa, we've had a conversation as judges, lawyers, maybe the apex private sector and so on, but not really with Wanjiku with regard to how we are tilting the administration of justice system to work for her. Another example, you see the government going online at 4 p.m. or thereabouts and announcing a new measure, such as wearing of face masks, and without giving people time to come to terms with it and to make preparations, within hours, the police are on the street enforcing it very vigorously against Wanjiku and her family members. Another is the right to public participation. Citizens want to be involved in these plans and as active participants, not just as passive recipients or subjects. Our own constitution, the Constitution of Kenya, elaborates very elaborately on the need for public participation. And we haven't seen this happen enough. Of course, freedoms of peacefully assembly, association, and expression are under attack, especially in countries that feel that suppression of information should form an integral part of their emergency response measures. In many places in Africa, 60 years after colonialism ended, serikali is still serikali. Government is still top secret, rather than one of the people, by the people, and for the people. And then, of course, there's a challenge of digitally sidelining Wanjiku as we take courts and other governmental processes online. So the Senate, for instance, has taken its public participation online, but it's essentially online. Our courts seem headed in the same direction. But going online is very expensive for Wanjiku because of the cost of electricity, cost of internet, cost of mobile devices, and so on. So if we don't take specific measures to include everyone, we'll end up with huge gaps in access to information, access to public participation, and access to justice. But we are seeing some good practices also. Yesterday, I came across a clip from the Nyandarua County Assembly, which has set up portals on WhatsApp, word by word, for soliciting written submissions for budget estimates from their people. So I would say that the Kenyan judiciary has tried more than its peers across the continent to maintain access to justice services during the crisis. Many other judiciaries have either stopped completely or are proceeding as though, we have no crisis, no virus in our midst. So Kenya was one of the early starters, so was South Africa, followed by Uganda. Nigeria, I think, has only begun taking the judiciary online in the last fortnight. But that's not to say that things are perfect. But it's also fair to say that in Kenya, I did a straw poll yesterday among colleagues and friends, many judicial officers are as frustrated as litigants and lawyers are with how the system is working. Assessing of filing fees is taking long. Online payment is a challenge in many places. rapidly converting our overall criminal justice system to online procedures or distance procedures has not been so easy. So we seem to be in the early stages of making this a new normal way to work. And in these circumstances, in my view, individual acts of excellence count almost as much as institution-wide reforms to laws, policies, practices, guidelines, and so on. So we have a number of judges, magistrates, registry staff, IT staff that are worthy of recognition and commendation. I recently came across one such commendation by the Honorable Professor Justice Joel Ngugi, recommending one of his staff, IT staff, and I was quite enamored by it. I hope as time goes by, we'll see ICJ Kenya, LSK, FIDA, and other institutions also giving out both bouquets and barbs as the occasion calls for. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, John. Beatrice, just seeing what John is saying and building from that, what are some of you have worked for a very long time with vulnerable groups, both women and children, and their access to justice needs are specific and they are quite sensitive when we talk about them interacting with the justice system. So building up from what Dawn is saying in terms of what are the access to justice needs, kindly elaborate to us, in your opinion, what has come up during this COVID-19? What are the specific nuances and challenges that vulnerable groups, women and children, face during this time?
Thank you, Teresa, and thank you to my senior colleagues. I'm honored to be part of this panel. So just thinking around the many things, we are living in the Sustainable Development Goals time, and we keep speaking about leaving no one behind. However, COVID has now presented an even bigger challenge for the groups that have been previously left behind. In my mind and in my work, I have women, because I am not free until all women are free, even if their shackles are different from mine. That was said by Audre Lorde. And we as an organization have been facing challenges because we have constantly represented women and assisted women to represent themselves in various courts. So we have quite a number of unrepresented litigants, women who present their cases, for example, in the children's court with various issues around child support, child maintenance, access to children. The children's court, as it is not operational in that sort of way. And it has the highest number of unrepresented litigants. These are people coming from far-flung areas, or even if you just go next door, Kibera, Madare, and such areas where we represent, or even deep inside Isiolo, wherever it might be, where the very rural woman is coming from, how do they have access to virtual platforms? These people are now at a point where they're thinking about bread and butter issues. How do they think about accessing justice through Zoom? We are also dealing with illiteracy, not just basic education, but also digital literacy challenges that are presenting. I have, for example, a number of cases that I would like to bring to the fore. I have a lady, let's call her Wanjiku, who has a matter in Kajiado Court. She has had her divorce finalized. She was waiting to have a hearing on the division of matrimonial property. Her case has taken 6 years in court, and all that time she has been living in a single room, waiting for the division of the matrimonial property so that she can have a life of her own to start from scratch. That has been impeded by COVID. She cannot access court. She is an elderly woman around 65 years. How do we help her around digital access to courts? I have in mind 2 separate succession causes, where one is a widow in a contest with her brothers-in-law over her deceased husband's property, which she is depending on to continue the livelihood of her children. There is another who is a daughter and joined in a battle with her brothers to get a share of her deceased father's estate, and that is her only hope of reprieve from an abusive marriage. That is the only way she sees herself getting out of an abusive marriage. We also have very many perpetrators and aggressors who have used COVID as a cutting to hide behind and continue their violations. There are a raft of human rights violations currently going on, but this has given space and emboldening perpetrators of especially gender-based violence cases. You will find police have been turning away victims of who go to report domestic violence and other cases, saying they do not have space to lock up perpetrators. They have in fact been instructed to reduce the number of people they hold in their cells. You will also find that many people are afraid to report. For example, there is an area around Limuru where they are in an island enclosed by road gates. They cannot go over either to Kikuyu police station or Tigoni police station because there are roadblocks all over. So those people are in sort of an island and cut off from any access to law enforcement or access to justice because they cannot even access physically the court, even if they were to attempt to go there. What this has presented is some parties resorting to different dispute resolution mechanisms. Victims get turned away and are told domestic violence is a domestic issue, is a family issue, go and solve it at the dispute level. So you're sending back the victim and the perpetrator in the same environment where they're being abused. Why can't we come up with a system? I mean, we were able to find quarantine facilities. Can't these perpetrators have their own quarantine facility and stay there at their own cost while the women and children are being kept away? You realize most children have closed schools, and statistics show that most perpetrators of sexual violence against children are people known to them. These are relatives, they are people they stay with in the house, stepfathers, stepmothers, cousins, elder uncles, elder siblings even. These children are stuck with those people in the house. Where will that child report to? Who will have access to them when they need the access to justice services that they can? So sometimes, well, the courts are open and we will be told that the criminal courts are having hearings where the plea is being taken. That's fine. The perpetrator will be arraigned in court and they will plead not guilty. What will the court do? It will most likely set bail terms that are reasonable, well, within their constitutional right, but at a lower scale this time because there's an effort to decongest detention facilities. So you will find the perpetrator will be sent back to the same community where he has come from to intimidate, threaten witnesses and victims. So what is the future of that case that we are trying to build? Will, after the perpetrator has been allowed to intimidate witnesses, what then will be the future of the case that you're trying to prosecute? We also have very many cases of sexual violence involving children, which had been set down for hearing during the April holidays when the children had closed school. These are mostly children whose parents are also vulnerable and marginalized. Now, we keep getting questions. When will we go back to court? When will the ongoing case be heard? So those ongoing cases, the backlog keeps pushing. Remember, these are cases that have been in court for a significant length of time before they got an allocation of an April hearing date. So the vulnerable and marginalized have totally been left behind in this. And I can see someone asking if you're taking advantage of the Protection Against Domestic Violence Act and the protections that are therein in the act, you realize to get a restraining order, you would have to go through the court system. We had one case where we had already filed for a restraining order and a protection order for the client just before COVID began. And we were at a point where the court had not certified the matter urgent and we had been told to serve. Then movement has been restricted. So will the court be considering such instances and the restriction of movement to issue restraining orders considering the circumstances of COVID?
Right. Thank you so much, Beatrice, and thank you for shedding light into, some of the struggles that vulnerable persons and marginalized persons are facing, especially during COVID-19. Judge Majanja, let me come to you and, just listening to what Dawn has said, listening to what Beatrice has said in terms of access to justice needs, and bearing in mind that access to justice needs have heightened now with COVID-19 and the restrictions and interventions that, have attempted to be put in place. Now more than ever, during this pandemic, the citizens have needed the courts to remain open. I know the judiciary had, has come a journey, first beginning with, reducing the activities within the court and then reopening the courts with the processes through the NCAJ letter. So, let us know, try and help us understand what are the things that the judiciary has done, what are the steps that the judiciary is taking to ensure that when Wanjiku, and I see one of our participants has asked us to define who Wanjiku is, just in case somebody doesn't know who Wanjiku is. And we use Wanjiku loosely to mean an ordinary person. So it's not engendered to mean female, but of course, understanding also that the access to justice burden is heavily placed on women more than men, with the evidence that we have had along the way. But Judge, let us know, what has the judiciary done to ensure that the ordinary person can access justice during this time?
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank ICJ for providing this forum at this particular time to engender dialogue on access to justice. I think it's important that we talk to one another because access to justice is not a task for one institution. That said, also before I proceed, I just want to recognize that many people who have contributed and continue to contribute to access to justice: judges, magistrates, judicial staff, advocates, prosecutors, state councils, police officers, all who go to work together to ensure that justice continues even through this difficult time. Before I just get on to the subject matter, I just want to stipulate certain things. First, COVID is something most of us, or all of us right now, have never seen before. No one planned for it. It came, in a manner of speaking, suddenly, and we had to use what we call a precautionary approach to how we deliver justice. And that is why on 16th, we had to scale down operations. And I use the word scale down deliberately because there has been an impression created that the courts closed down. The fact is that the courts never closed down. The courts were alive to the fact that this pandemic has come and we need to respond to it in the manner that takes care of the interests of our staff and members of the public in light of the challenges caused by the COVID pandemic. That said, I think the reaction of the judiciary was I would say, governed by three broad principles. I think first is the government directives on who is to work, that people should work from home. Secondly, that even if we were to work, we have to work within the Ministry of Health guidelines, because the government policy really is containment of this virus. And that is why initially we were told to work from home, and the focus was really deal with what could be done at that point. So that between 15th of March and about mid-April, the focus was on delivering judgments, working on judgments that were due. And, you know, judgments are not, I wouldn't say, people look at them and say, okay, you were just delivering judgments, but judgments are the work products of any judicial officer. The courts were also engaged in a very important activity of decongesting prisons. I think sometimes we forget that people in prison, people in remand are vulnerable people. And from what the scientific, from what the facts that emerge is that, in fact, the prisons and the remands are the, you know, they have a potential of spreading the COVID virus very, very rapidly. So between that time, we have revised sentences, we have revised bail terms, and a substantial number of people in prison have been released. Because of the nature of our work, we were forced to leverage on technology. And the reason why we leverage on technology is that it was the best way to be able to deal with this situation. But again, one thing we need to recognize is that over the years, there has been very little investment in the judiciary. And you recall that even before this pandemic, the last substantial issue the judiciary had to deal with were budget cuts. And the technology budget had been severely affected, and the investment in that area, of course, governs what we have now as the response. So we were forced to leverage on technology, and doing the best we can, we have been unable to mount online hearings all over the country. And one thing that has been consistent is, first of all, we've been able to deal with the people in prison. We have been conducting criminal appeals. We have been conducting pleas. We have been dealing with revisions. And that is not to say that physical hearings have not been going on. Actually, they have been going on when it is necessary and when justice demands. And from what I know is that no one has been sent away from court when it is necessary that they be heard. So all over the country, our courts are open, our judges and magistrates are working, and if and when it is necessary to hear matters, they're available. However, we have been facing very serious challenges even in terms of delivery of justice. Firstly, we know that access to courts has been severely restricted in terms of physical attendance. And this is just because we are in this situation where, first of all, we have the curfew, we have restrictions on movement, we have difficulties in people moving from one place to another. So we have had to postpone all urgent and non-urgent hearings, the normal day-to-day hearings. There have been concerns about remote justice, this justice that people say is conducted on Zoom, and implications on the right to a fair trial. So whereas we would like to do that, this is something we have to think through, not only ourselves, but with our stakeholders. The third issue is, even as we do these online court sessions, there is the issue of adequate facilities, either in the courts or in remand or outside with our stakeholders we engage with in terms of quality video conferencing facilities. It's an issue that we also need to deal with, even if we are to upscale reliance on technology and increase investment. There is also a very important issue that we have encountered. There has been unwillingness by many lawyers, by litigants, to accommodate and embrace technology in order to ensure that court processes are running And this has been very, very acute, particularly in certain civil cases where what we are told is that lawyers have not been paid and therefore they cannot go on with their matters, even if we put them on the technology platform. So that again is an issue we have to deal with. Issues of connectivity in many parts of the country. And again, and I agree with Don there, that really insisting on online platforms is an issue of serious access to justice for those who are indigent, who are underrepresented, and it is something we have to deal with. Then, of course, even if you say you are going to hear matters, as I said, you have to deal with government directives on movement. Like one of the issues we have to contend with, even if we were to say that we want to proceed with succession cases, most of the people who are involved in succession cases are old, they come from far distances, and we have to find a way to accommodate them, particularly in terms of protecting them and their health and protecting the health of the others. Then, of course, we are always aware that even as we go through this process, ultimately we'll have serious backlog at the end of the day, which may further impede access to justice, and we have to start thinking about how to avoid that eventuality. That said, we have done a lot, and I just want to mention a few things. For example, the Supreme Court is now entirely online, and that is for good reason. The Supreme Court has a few judges. Most of them are beyond that age where they can work with other people because they are vulnerable. But also one has to realize that if one judge is affected, then the whole court has to go into lockdown. And that also goes for the Court of Appeal. But I'm happy to say for the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeal, all of them are proceeding with their work normally. The Court of Appeal is conducting hearings, and in fact, conducting hearings in all the court stations. They're up to date in their decisions. And they took a deliberate step to hear criminal appeals of unrepresented litigants during the month of April. And many people either have been released or have had their cases cleared. In the High Court, in the Environment and Labor Relations Court, and the ELC, Land and Environment, the matters are proceeding. But again, each of the cases present a different typology of cases. For example, in the Commercial Division in Nairobi, where we have very few unrepresented people, the challenge is, of course, how we adopt the technology. But in cases, for example, where you have murder cases, you have a problem. Even if you want to hear the case, the police have to go out, look for the witnesses, bring them, and one has to take into account the health regulations that are prevailing that make it difficult to hear cases. The magistrates are also working. They are taking pleas. They are hearing certain criminal cases. In fact, I would like to mention that I think at the Chief Magistrates Court, Nairobi, they have made a deliberate effort to proceed with cases of defilement. And from this month, they will be proceeding with them and making arrangements to hear them either physically or online platforms, depending on the circumstances. So that one is being done, and it will be rolled over the country. The Children's Court is also hearing cases physically because of the nature of those cases. We also have tribunals. The Rent Restriction Tribunal is also hearing cases, and they're making arrangements to take cases, particularly where we are hearing there are many, many evictions. They are very active in that area. So I think the judiciary is responding, but of course, we are hampered by the nature of the technology and the circumstances which we find ourselves in. Access to justice has always been a problem in this country. It is not a new thing. Over the last 15, 20 years, the judiciary has been investing substantially in improving access to justice. Of course, the COVID presents a particular challenge. And what I would like to say is that we do not have a monopoly over ideas on how to improve access to justice. What we need is cooperation of all our stakeholders to ensure that Wanjiku is well served. So thank you very much. I'll be happy to hear other interventions and elaborate further. Just one more issue. We had also invested a lot in mediation. We have now started getting requests for virtual mediation. It is working. I would like to say as of yesterday, we had 58 referrals. 8 cases have already been settled virtually, and we are still exploring on how to roll that out given the circumstances. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judge. And we'll come back to that, mediation and other justice systems in just a bit. But before I let you go, Judge, we saw the Chief Justice speak publicly and say, the budget for the judiciary has been cut. It's small. It's not able to meet the needs of the judiciary. So for it to offer justice services to the people. And that was before COVID-19. So COVID-19 has presented an even greater challenge for the judiciary. So I'm just wondering, has the judiciary had an opportunity to review its budget, to present this budget, and especially because we see the national government coming up with the funds, emergency funds to deal with COVID-19, has access to justice been one of those issues that the government is particularly interested in funding using this emergency fund?
Yes, I would say that in our budget proposals for the financial year 2020-2021, we proposed substantially an increase in the budgets that go to the component of access to justice. This includes technology, investing more in technology, investing in facilities, increasing the budget for mediation, also increasing the budget for pro bono services. I think let's not forget that it's very, very key in terms of creating intermediaries between those who are unrepresented and indigent and the court system. So we have made those proposals. We hope they'll be accepted. Some of these issues, for example, let me just give you an example. Technology is an enabler of justice. So even where we are saying that Wanjiku may not have the wherewithal, I think it's important for us to realize that we can use technology to improve that access. For example, when we are talking about the woman, say in Moranga, who has to come for her succession case with her brothers in Nairobi, for example, it would be nice, for example, in every court station or in particular areas to have a virtual hearing room where they can go to and be their evidence taken so that they don't have to travel to Nairobi. But those kind of facilities, of course, require money to put up. So we have to think about, even when we think about technology, it's not that we are saying technology is an end in itself. It is an enabler of justice. It is one of the things that will facilitate this access to justice. Because as it is, even when we say we have physical facilities, good courts, we are building courts everywhere, people still have to come to those courts. So we are looking at all that to see how we can improve that access.
All right, thank you so much, Judge. Please remember to continue typing in your questions. We'll look at the questions. My colleague Silas will analyze those questions in just a bit. So keep them coming, comments. We appreciate those who are sending them already and those who are tuned in. Let's pick up from where Judge left in terms of court annex mediation. And I come to you, Dr. Musumba. You've interacted with several justice mechanisms that are provided under the Constitution. COVID-19, is it time that we now start appreciating this other justice systems? Because I think we've been slow in terms of appreciating and incorporating them in terms of systems that the ordinary person can use. So does COVID-19 present us with that opportunity to appreciate them and use this Is it something that is accessible, available, viable for Wanjiko to use? Yeah. What are your thoughts around that?
Thank you very much to ICJ for this opportunity to be able to share my views on this matter. I've just had a quick look at the number of participants in this forum. We're looking at about 300 people gathered in one forum to be able to interact with the justice issues on the question. People are entering webinars in Russia, France, and all over the place. So on the one hand, Corona has taught us that we can actually continue to have discourses online and that are not actually confined by space, geography, or anything. So thank you for this opportunity. I salute my colleagues in this panel, my senior, Dawn, Justice Majanja, my peer, and our dear younger colleague, Beatrice. And now going to the issues that you've asked me. First, I'd like to say that the advent of the coronavirus and its impact on the judiciary, it has actually only shown the stresses that are experienced in the formal justice mechanism sphere. For the simple reason that there's a research that was done over 10 years ago that shows that over 90% of Kenyans access justice in the informal spheres. Therefore, and of course, you know, our population has gone up and we need current research, of course, being in Kipra has taught me that we have to be able to come up with evidence-based solutions. So we need a further research to be able to determine today whether the percentage remains at over 90%, or whether there has been any shift. So that percentage of people, corona or no corona, has been accessing justice. Disputes at the border stage with border vehicles, borders are still being resolved. Disputes in our villages at the watering holes are still being resolved. Disputes between individuals in our villages and in other spheres are still being resolved, corona or no corona. So I would like to, I'd like us all to be able to place in context that the problem that is being experienced in the formal justice system, when you take into account the number of people who actually access justice in that system versus those who access in the informal sphere, those who access in the informal sphere are actually many, many more. I'd also like to point out that the informal sphere, which of course justice in that sphere is largely based on the enduring strength of culture, where we rely on elders or we rely on persons that we have identified. Because you see, when you're looking at, let's say, the border sector, people from different ethnic communities, different dispositions come together, but then they do decide among themselves to be able to give one individual or two individuals, whatever structure they come up with, to be able to be subservient to those people so they can lead them. So if you can be able to think about that enduring nature of culture, or those are the systems that are actually assisting people to be able to access justice, then that tells you that we need to do a lot more to be able to determine the nature of justice dispensed in these systems. Because if you look at Article 159 2C, that actually constitutionally mandates the courts to be able to have reference to traditional methods or to traditional dispute resolution sites, you can see that this is something that is actually quite current and needs to actually be taken into account today, except that you have to ask yourself the question whether the justice that is accessed within these informal spheres meets the constitutional criteria. I'll give you an example. When it comes to, of course, our traditional norms and systems, they are generally patriarchal. Of course, men have the upper hand. So where you have a situation where elders are predominantly male, making decisions over these issues, you'll find that in domestic violence cases, then a woman actually stands very disadvantaged. If you're looking at sexual and gender-based violence cases, then women would generally be disadvantaged, as well as succession, where, of course, in many situations, the man is the one who has the preeminence in terms of inheriting things from their parents. So the question would be, these systems of justice that are informal, one has to be able to scrutinize and be able to see to what extent can they actually be upgraded, or be used. Remember that they have the capacity to interrupt even the formal justice systems. We have seen time and time again the informal sector affecting the formal sector. We have had cases in court that have collapsed, murder cases, domestic violence cases, cases involving children that have collapsed because of lack of witnesses. Why? Because the issues have been resolved quietly. They've been resolved quietly in the community. We've seen cases where people have impregnated young girls, and when the matter is taken to court and they're actually arrested, you see the family of the girl coming to ask that the case is taken out. Why? Because they've already been settled. Because the man who impregnated this lady said he's going to pay the school fees of this girl as well as the young child. So the informal justice arena clearly cannot be able to resolve many of these, some of these cases. It may be easy to resolve some, but not all. So the question would be, can we have a blend where, for example, the formal justice system is able to upgrade certain parts of the informal system so that it is actually usable? Do we have those places or those sections where it will not work, and therefore you want to be able to influence the informal and make sure that it actually works well? I'd like to point out that, of course, I think we're all aware that in Rwanda, they use the Gashasha courts to be able to address the question of genocide. Now, if an issue such as the cold-blooded murder of many people can be resolved sitting on reeds, where the formal justice system came up with a methodology and then was able to say that we can deal with these cases in this way, these ones in this way, people who meet this